Before I introduce today's guest, I want to tell you about our sponsor of our podcast, The Great Courses Plus. This is the teaching company's The Great Courses, which I've been listening to for decades. They have thousands of professionally produced college courses or courses taught by college professors, the best in the country. And they've introduced a app for your phone. It's thegreatcoursesplus.com. And so you just touch the app and you open up the course you want to listen to. The one I just started this week is on Understanding the Old Testament by Professor Robert D. Miller II. So just to give you an idea of how it works, you just touch on the lecture you want to listen to. Like number 1 is the Old Testament as literature. Number 2 is the Genesis creation story. I'm right now on lecture 3, What God Intended for Adam and Eve. Oh boy, this should be interesting. In any case, this is great because you can skip around. If I find one of the lectures boring, I just skip to the next one. You can do it on audio or video and all from your phone. It's a terrific way to consume content, particularly during social isolation. During the pandemic, it's a great way to become an autodidact. So if you want to know more, you can, if you sign up through my podcast, then you get a free trial. So go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/salon. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/salon, and you get a free trial with free access to the entire library of all these hundreds and hundreds of courses and thousands of lectures. So with that, I'll introduce my next guest. My guest today is Sarah Scoles. Her new book is They're Already Here, UFO Culture and Why We See Saucers. Now, she doesn't think they're already here, that is extraterrestrials, but she's taking kind of a sociology or anthropology look at the UFO community. She wrote a previous book on Jill Tarter and the SETI program, and her background is in astronomy and physics. So she is a science journalist, a contributing writer at Wired, and a contributing editor at Popular Science. Her work has appeared in Wired, The Atlantic, Slate, Smithsonian, Vice, and the Washington Post, Scientific American, Popular Science Discover, and The Verge. A former editor of Astronomy magazine, Scoles formerly worked at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, the location of the first ever SETI project. And she's the author of Making Contact, is her book about Jill Tarter. Anyway, we had a super interesting, wide-ranging conversations, of course, about UFOs and the UFO community and how they differ from the scientific or the SETI community, and what constitutes reliable evidence or reliable knowledge, what it means to believe something. I want to believe. I don't want to have to believe. I want to know. These kinds of epistemological questions. And then we get into kind of some deeper subjects toward the end on the difference between leading a happy life and a meaningful life. This is in the context of her kind of reflections at the end of the book about what it meant when she lost her religion. She was raised Mormon, and which is kind of a type of UFO religion in a way. And, how she has kind of made a sense of the world without belief in the supernatural, God, the afterlife, and so on. And then we get into some civil rights issues toward the end, and you'll see how I'm not even sure how we ended up there. We're just kind of little sidetracks that I take guests on sometimes. Anyway, super interesting, and so I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming on the show. The new book is They Are Already Here, UFO Culture and Why We See Saucers. So tell me, who are the they?
That's a good question. That I should have a better answer for. They theoretically are the aliens who, in our overall cultural mindset, drive these flying saucers. That's just kind of how people tend to associate the pilots of flying craft that we can identify as aliens. So that's if you go on Twitter, you will hear a lot of "They're Already Here." Yes,
yeah, I figure that's what the title is hinting at. In a way, another way to say it is that they really do exist in the sense that they exist in the minds of people who truly believe it. Like if somebody says they believe in God, I believe that they believe in God, and so those gods are real in their heads, in as much as people act on their beliefs. So to that extent, I see what you're doing there. It seems like
Right.
I really enjoyed the book. I read it twice on audio, and it's really a gripping story. It's something of a follow-up, I think, to your previous book, Making Contact, Jill Tarter and the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So in a way, you're kind of touching in both worlds, the one you were trained in, the physical sciences and astronomy, and then that kind of took you to this other community of people. So let's start off just talking about a little bit of the sociology of science and the kind of two different communities of people that study a related topic, but they do it from a rather different perspective.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I studied radio astronomy when I was in school, which brought me into contact with these SETI astronomers who are looking for the radio broadcasts, or sometimes now the laser broadcasts from alien civilizations, and they kind of try to do it in a systematic, scientific, method-centric way, where they gather data, eliminate hypotheses, set limits on what we might be able to see, and kind of just go through the sky and see if we can find anything with technology that we might be able to imagine. And then I would say that these SETI scientists try to set themselves apart a bit from this other group of people, the UFO / they're already here crowd, who believe not that the aliens might be sending, fancy FM radio from their planet, but might have already built spaceships that can traverse vast swaths of space-time and have come here. And that, that to some people that seems like a semantic difference. Either you think aliens are far out here, or you think they have currently traveled to Earth. But for these two different groups of people, I think that's a big distinction.
Yeah, when you were getting to know the SETI scientists, how do you think they would answer the question, do you believe aliens are out there?
Yeah, surprisingly, so when I was working on Making Contact, the book, the person I talked to the most was Jill Tarter, who's kind of been at the head of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence for a number of decades. And she answers the question in a totally agnostic way. She does not have an opinion, so she says, about whether there are intelligent extraterrestrials out there. But others, recently I just heard Seth Shostak say that he absolutely does believe they're out there, or else he wouldn't have spent his life searching. So I think there's actually kind of a diversity of opinions. But I think what maybe sets some SETI scientists apart from some UFO believers is that they are maybe more willing to accept to follow the evidence than to follow their belief system, regardless of what they believe.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you mean by the word belief. I mean, when Seth says, yeah, I believe they're out there, I think he means it in a different way than ufologists say, I believe they've come here. I think he's making, the Drake equation type argument, a Bayesian reasoning kind of argument that, I wouldn't be searching if there weren't pretty good odds that, given that 100 billion stars in every galaxy, and there's 100 billion galaxies or trillion galaxies or whatever, and every one of them has planets, and you crunch the numbers, okay, they really got to be out there. So what's the harm of searching? So when I say I believe, I think what he means is the odds are pretty good, so it's worth the search, as opposed to I know for sure I've been in contact with them and they came to my house in the middle of the night, so forth. For sure.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I've definitely, I've met a lot of people who are interested in UFOs who you could not show them any piece of evidence that would convince them otherwise, and that's their kind of belief system. But I've also met a lot of people who are interested in UFOs who I would say also take an agnostic attitude toward it, kind of more like Jill Tarter's attitude, where they just say, this is a topic I'm interested in. It would be cool if, I did discover a spaceship in the desert in New Mexico somewhere, and but I'm not going to count on that, and I don't necessarily think that is true, and I don't necessarily think that is aliens. And I think, that group of people was a surprise to me, I think, coming from the outside and from the physical science.
Would that be somebody who would say, instead of calling them UFOs, it'd call them UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena? Could be a Russian or Chinese drone or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, and that UAP term, which I mean, it seems to have started as a military term, I think is an attempt to take the stigma and that automatic alien association away from UFOs, which are kind of inseparable from aliens in culture at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I met Jill at several conferences that we both belong to this group called Adventures of the Mind for these advanced high school kids. And anyway, I got to know her a little bit. I described her as this sort of steely-eyed, missile man, zeroed in on what she wants to do. And so I had a few short debates with her. I'll just recount these from The Believing Brain, my book, my chapter on that. One of them I actually did on the Drake equation. There's the element of L, the length of time that a civilization exists. And, is it 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years? And, SETI scientists tend to argue it's something like 10,000 years we've been a civilization, and 100 years since we've had like radio technology. So you can use parameters like that in the L in the equation. But I took, I think it was 60 civilizations and showed that the average lifespan was like 400 years or something like that. So that L means the total number of technological civilizations is probably going to be pretty low because nation states go out of business. They collapse, and therefore they're not going to continue some kind of searching program. Anyway, she objected to this, and hang on, let me go back to where I was on that point. Yeah, here it is. So she says, I think L is undetermined except for perhaps a lower limit of about 100 years. What matters here is not the longevity of the technological civilization, but the length of time the relevant technology continues to be employed by the technologists or even their post-biological creations. So if radio or optical lasers are the correct modes of interstellar communication, if there is any such, then L is 100 years and counting. If another technology is the relevant one and we haven't invented it yet, then L is 0 for now, but perhaps not forever. When you enumerated the longevity of the 60-odd defunct civilizations, what you failed to mention was that the technologies they invented were often adopted by and continued forward in time by the civilizations that replaced them. So that's true, except that you still need a political unit or a private company or somebody that wants to continue the search, or else it's going to stop. But the most interesting debate, I also did in a separate paper, I did a kind of an analysis of the SETI pioneers and who they were and what they were like and just their background. So it turns out they were all raised religious and they were all atheists. So I kind of had fun just thinking, aliens are sort of deities for atheists, right? So as I wrote, the indefatigable ETI researcher Jill Tarter, who brooks no sloppiness or sentimentality in her rigorous research program, in response to my initial suggestion in a science review essay that ETIs are secular gods, expressed her contempt at such a characterization and correctly noted that, quote, physics, not faith, dictates that any successful SETI detection will be with a long-lived technology and perhaps the technologists who invented it. And that, quote, we work on the search because we want to know the answer to a very old question popularly phrased as, are we alone? And so then I asked her, well, why do you search for signs, guys, for a sign? She says, I search because I'm curious, not to find some deity, secular or otherwise, exclamation point. I do not know the answer to this old question, but I'm as excited about using whatever tools are available to find the answer as I am excited about the possibility of using other tools to understand the nature of dark matter and so on and so forth. So I thought that was rather amusing.
Yeah, I can absolutely hear that in her actual voice inside of my head. Yeah. But no, I mean, and I think different people like Jill would object to it in different ways. But I think there are a lot of parallels in the search for God and meaning, in the search for aliens, and some anthropological writers who I read while doing research for this UFO book talked about how the aliens kind of represent an accessible God because they're like a version of us. They're not actually some kind of, paranormal or spiritual thing. They're probably, if they exist, are a physical thing that evolved on a planet just like we did, and they got better, and they got better technology than we did. And so there's some kind of superior status that we could obtain. So it kind of fulfills two objectives. And actually, related to what you were saying earlier about L and the disagreements about how long L is, there's actually an interesting paper a couple of years ago that came from the Future of Humanity Institute that kind of took all these different disagreements and the full uncertainty levels of all the different parameters of the Drake equation to calculate a new answer, including all of those uncertainties. And they actually came to the conclusion that it is not unlikely that we are alone in the entire universe, which I thought was interesting and contrary to what we normally hear.
Yeah, no, I think the idea that that we're not alone, that there's somebody out there, is emboldening in a sense. It doesn't have to be religious or spiritual, or use whatever word you want, but in the scientific sense, it's possible. I mean, they really could be. Sure. And I don't know, that when you crunch the numbers, particularly since the Kepler Space Telescope has found so many extrasolar planets, pretty much every star has, a dozen or so planets. So chances are pretty good. So then you don't have to use faith. You don't have to say, well, I just believe because I want to. Although you have an interesting discussion in your book about the whole Fox Mulder thing. I want to believe in the episode that came in, and then actually let me read your own words, which I really liked. So this is you speaking. If I had a poster on my wall, though, it would say, "I don't want to have to believe. I would love to think UFOs are out there and that aliens pilot them, but I'm incapable of thinking that unless I know it. Still, perhaps knowing it is not the point of UFOs." So what do you mean by that?
Well, as far as the part about not wanting to believe, I just feel like to take on an idea like that, I would need a whole lot of evidence and would need to know, like I said. And then the idea that knowing is not the point is actually not something I came into the book thinking, but was from talking to people who've spent a long time researching UFOs, and they're very self-aware about this. And what people who are very serious and often agnostic about the search say is that it is the search itself that is that like quickens their pulse and makes them excited, and it's the fact that it is a kind of, you might agree or disagree with this, but a persistent mystery, whatever you think they are. People see them, they're documents that you can scour, and you can kind of spend your whole life trying to figure out what is going on and not succeed. And so it gives people a project and a sense of wonder. And if they figured it out, then, they'd have to find a new hobby. Which is
well, it'd be hard to top that one, because that would be the greatest discovery in the history of science. And to think that I'm pursuing this, much like conspiracy theorists, are convinced that there's some vast cabal going on. If they could just get to the bottom of it, who's running the government or causing wars or whatever, it is kind of a grand, exciting project.
It is, yeah. And the fact that especially if you think that, if in conspiracy theories and often in UFO world, which overlaps quite a bit with general conspiracy world, you as just a regular private citizen might have the tools to unravel this mystery. And the idea that you could spend all night on the internet or staring at the sky and solve these big mysteries about these people in power and these powerful aliens. I don't know. I understand why that's an appealing prospect.
Well, you kind of hinted at the end of the book of your own pathway from religion to science. You were an ultra-devout Mormon, you describe yourself. So your parents are Mormon?
They actually left the church a few years ago, but they were Mormon for most of my life, yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And their parents, your grandparents were Mormon too?
No, actually, my parents were converts. They converted when I was about 2. I know, unusual. But
unusual. Despite all those missionaries that go out, I think they're not that successful. But if you think about it, Mormonism is kind of a UFO religion in a sense, right? When you die, you get your own planet, and the gods come from the planets and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mormon politicians have historically supported things like SETI research, and Harry Reid most recently helped form an alleged UFO research program. And As a Mormon kid, you grow up. I'm probably going to get the quote wrong, and any Mormons listening are going to know. But there's a quote somewhere about just there being more civilizations than there are grains of sand, and you grow up as a Mormon kid thinking that this is not the only planet with life on it.
Yeah. Andrian makes this point in one of the latest Cosmos episodes that there's a new solar system formed like every second in the entire universe if you just crunch the numbers. So it's like new solar system, new solar system, new solar system, and just for all day, all night, all day tomorrow, and so on. And so the chances of us being alone, it just seems. But that's a different question from have they come here?
Right. Right, which I think is a very hard question and requires at least a little bit of arrogance, because if the universe is so big and there are so many solar systems where life could potentially form, why would a civilization that had grown, that had evolved enough to develop spaceships that could traverse, a bunch of the universe, why would they come to Earth if there are so many other places? Like, what makes us so great? And humans historically are very great at thinking we're great and special. And so it's just it's hard to believe that they would spend their precious time coming here.
Is that your
unless
answer?
They're machines and have no concept of time. So
well, I guess that's the idea, right? That they would create self-replicating robot machines that would then populate every possible place in the universe over some finite period of time. I think it was like 10 million years you could explore the entire Milky Way galaxy with robotic machines that are self-replicating. So what is your answer to the Fermi Paradox of where is everybody if they're out there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure, unfortunately, like anyone.
Well, no one does. That's the beauty of the question.
Yeah, right. Right. I mean, if I had to choose an answer, I think it would be a combination of your statement earlier that actually civilizations don't tend to last that long and don't tend to continue their technological projects, even if they continue the technology, like a plan to go visit Earth or broadcast to Earth might fall apart after a few hundred years when those rulers fall off. Or also, I think it also seems likely, although this is putting a bunch of Earth psychology on aliens, that people eventually, they spend a little bit of time in a space age and then kind of turn back inward to their own planet and just aren't that interested in the rest of the cosmos. What about you?
Not just L, but also I think the vast distances between the stars makes it very unlikely that you'd encounter anything. I mean, Andreen herself said, when she and Carl did the Voyager record, the Voyager record is really for us. It's sort of a way of saying, if we were going to encapsulate our species in one album, what would we put on there? Because the chances of any extraterrestrial intelligence finding the Voyager spacecraft, much less capturing it and then figuring out how to play a stylus on a gold record, it's such 1970s technology. It's pretty unlikely. So, but she points out, the Voyager spacecraft is traveling at, I don't know, something like 40,000 miles an hour. I mean, it's really hauling ass. And if it were going to the nearest star system, it would take 70,000 years to get there. That's just a long time of nothingness. And so I just think it's mostly empty space. And if they're out there exploring, they just missed us, most likely. Of course, your subjects in this book, they don't think that there is no Fermi Paradox. They're here. Right. Yeah. They're, and not all of them, but a lot of people are very convinced that they're here. They're among us, and not just in the book, but in the world, there's the range from people who think there are reptilians in Congress to people who think they just, maybe cruise here through the skies and then leave. So there's a range of people, but and people are very certain, from people I interviewed in the book to people I've ridden in lift cars, where you suddenly find out when you say, "Oh, what do you do?" "Oh, I'm working on a book about UFOs." Then you find out what everyone thinks about UFOs. So they just open up and tell you?
Oh yeah, for sure. That is actually something that was interesting about working on the book, is if you tell people that's what you're doing, they're like, "Oh, this is a safe space for me to tell my UFO story." And there's an awful lot of people, and including ones you wouldn't expect, to have UFO stories. Right.
This is at some of those conferences you went to?
Sure, yeah, or just friends who never brought it up before. But
oh, really?
But I think the latest polls show one in six people in the U.S. say that they have had some kind of encounter. So, if you're in a group of six.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the question is, what does the encounter represent? Right. So when somebody tells me they've had an anomalous experience of some kind, I tend to believe them, like they're not just making stuff up. But what does it represent? An illusion, a hallucination, a sleep paralysis, dream. It was Venus or the moon or swamp gas or whatever. It could be any number of things.
Sure. Yeah. And something I found interesting also is, working on the book made me pay more attention to the sky and to what I was seeing in the sky. And I realized that I often see things that I don't immediately know what they are. And the stories that I could tell about things I've seen are not that dissimilar from some of the ones that I heard from people, not the abduction stories, but just the strange light in the sky.
Yeah.
But, I think it's just you're primed differently, where I was just like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know what that is, but someone does. And I didn't even think of it as an unidentified object. Whereas for somebody else, it might, form the basis of a very deep belief and meaningful experience.
Now, would you attribute that to your scientific training or just by temperament, you tend not to go in that direction?
I think a little bit of both. And also a little bit of having been reporting on science and technology for a while, and also just, thinking that there are lots of advanced things that we have, and aware of the fallacies of my own senses too, I think.
And did you get the sense the people you met at these UFO conferences did not have that by temperament, or they didn't have it by training? Or, I don't want to ask you, were they gullible, but just maybe say more open-minded to the possibility of these things, whereas a trained skeptic scientist like yourself would default to the null hypothesis that there is nothing to explain extraterrestrial unless there's extraordinary evidence to overturn that.
Mm-hmm. I think that is true of some people at the conferences and other places that I talk to, that they don't have that skeptical mindset or the skeptical training to look at something and think about all the alternatives that it could be. But I will say that there were a lot of people who study UFOs who do have that and are as interested in it from the classified technology side or from the human side, and who kind of distrust eyewitness testimony as much as I do, and yet still interested in stuff.
So when you go there and you tell them, they find out you're a science writer with a scientific background, and oh boy, let's try to convince her, and she's writing a book, or however you introduced yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mostly would say, this is where I'm coming from. I am a skeptic, but I promise to kind of like you said about hearing about people's extraordinary experiences. Like, I believe that you had that experience that you interpreted that way. So I promised that I would treat their experience respectfully, and in general, they wouldn't try to convince me, and I wouldn't try to convince them. We would just kind of say what we both thought. And so actually most people were pretty receptive to that.
Did you feel like an anthropologist going into a foreign tribe to understand them?
I did a bit. Yeah, but I actually, when I started on the book, which just spun out of an article that I had worked on, where I had talked to people who had been doing mostly government research on past government programs that researched UFOs. And I found people who had been studying the history of them for decades. And I actually identified with them a lot, not specifically with the subject matter, but they had a question. They wanted to find an answer. They were going to go try to find all the evidence they could, and we can disagree about what the evidence said or didn't say. But I did try to go in with the mindset of trying to understand and identifying with at least some portion of the people who are in UFO world.
Yeah. The more serious ones that I met, like Stan Friedman, for example, we were on Larry King's show a couple times debating this, and he was a pretty good skeptic, and he would agree with me that 90 to 95% of all the sightings are fully explainable with natural atmospheric phenomena or whatever. So then it really came down to, what do you do with that 5% anomalies, for example?
Mm-hmm.
Now, for me, it's like, you don't have to do anything with it. It's just like, it's cool, spooky, weird, whatever. Maybe we'll figure it out. Maybe we'll never figure it out. Assign it to some graduate student to figure it out. I don't know. Something will come up. Maybe the government will release files 20 years from now and we'll find out it was this X-plane thing, test pilot thing or whatever. Or maybe never, and that in science, it's, there's, you make this point about, studying astronomy, that anomalies are interesting but you have to take them one at a time to decide what it means. And sometimes you can't figure out what it means, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I think what is interesting to me, and I think what interests a lot of people about UFOs, is that maybe unlike astronomy or many sciences, it only really does take one. Like, you don't need 5% unidentified. All you need is one thing that's an actual alien spaceship, and that's it. So you could kind of search forever because you're just looking for that one tiny needle in a haystack. You don't even need a category of anomalies.
Right.
Which is, yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like if, a Bigfoot searcher, instead of giving us blurry photographs and grainy videos, if they actually had a body that, anthropologists and primatologists could study and dissect and go, yep, that's a new species. That would be the end of the search, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, that's what we have at Roswell for UFOs, so.
Right, the alien body.
That's a joke. Yeah, that's a joke.
Yes,
yeah.
I understand. Yeah, so let's go through the history of it. The whole thing starts in the late 40s. You talk about Project Saucer, Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book. I can't even keep track of all these things. So maybe just kind of walk us through, how it all began and up to the whole Academy of the Stars and all that's kind of made a big splash recently.
Sure. Yeah. I guess the short version is this was all kind of catalyzed in the late 1940s when a guy named Kenneth Arnold saw what he deemed to be kind of like a fleet of 9 UFOs flying over Washington state. And then after that, kind of, public interest and government interest mounted in what could be these unidentified things flying in our skies. And, that it makes sense that the government, and particularly the military, would always be interested in that. If they don't think it's aliens, which would be a concern for them also, then maybe it's, the Soviets or whoever. And so they undertook these series of projects that you named, where they would take people's sightings and identify them and try to explain them. In general, like some of it was a good faith effort, and then some of it was like, we the people in charge don't want people to be freaked out about this and don't want them to think that it's a serious thing. So we're just going to put all our prosaic explanations out there so that people will chill out about these UFOs. And then in the late 1960s, they had determined that studying UFOs wasn't really providing any scientific knowledge that was useful. And they had also, they said, proved that UFOs were not a threat to national security. So if those two things are true, there was no point in the government studying them. And so that was kind of the end of the story, at least as far as we know, for a number of decades, until in late 2017, we heard, probably a lot of your listeners heard, about a program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which is essentially allegedly a program that is the modern version of these old government programs, where they take sightings from military personnel and try to explain them. And there's a lot of detailed debate that we probably don't need to get into about whether that's what the program was actually doing, or whether it was kind of looking to advanced foreign weapons systems more than UFOs. But we know about this because some of the people who say they were involved with this program joined a private company called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, which is run by a former, I guess current rock star named Tom DeLonge, who used to be in the band Blink-182. And he gathered these, intelligence and national security and government contractor people together into this organization that at one point said it wanted to reverse engineer a UFO. And so far has mostly succeeded in making music and movies. But yeah, this UFO program allegedly shut down in 2012, and we're back where we were, except that there has been some renewed government interest in, like, the Navy has created new reporting guidelines for its personnel to report if they see UFOs or things like that. So there's kind of been an official resurgence of interest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way it's presented in the media is that, the Pentagon or government has revealed that they had a secret UFO program and that they're real, or the footage is real, or the things we saw is real. I mean, there's so much muddled coverage of this. And that New York Times article, people don't realize this, that, the lead author, Keene, I forget her first name. Leslie Keene. Yeah, I read her book years ago on UFOs, generals and pilots speak out, or something like that. And, it looked like it was like journalists at the New York Times did this investigative story, and they came up with this incredible discovery. In fact, it was this woman who's been a pro-ufologist for a long, long time. Not sure how she got a byline in the New York Times. That really kind of changed the tone of the whole thing. But as you point out, this footage that the Nimitz video footage, that it looked like they released it for the first time in conjunction with that New York Times article. But you point out that it was actually back in wait a minute, let me get the right page here. 2007, I think it was. Here we go. That's right. Yeah. Right. The second video in the Times story, supposedly, I'm reading from your book now, shows pilots who took off from the ship USS Nimitz to intercept a UFO. But it has appeared on the internet before, way back in 2007. Now, you see, that never got reported. You're the first person I know to report that. UFO researcher Isaac Coy, a studious and methodological document gatherer who in professional life and under a different name is a British barrister, interesting, noted on his Facebook page that the Nimitz video had shown up on the conspiracy theory forum Above Top Secret. Years before, Coy traced it to the servers of a German film company, one that specialized in creating special effects. The moment I read that, I went, oh, okay. Okay. Both To the Stars and the Navy have acknowledged that this video was leaked earlier than this latest time it appeared online. Okay, so that would kind of indicate, maybe somebody faked it or doctored it or something like that. But then you continue. This is even more interesting. Another strange coincidence is, you're quoting Greenwald now, 48 hours after the date of the Nimitz sighting, NASA flew their scramjet engine in the same vicinity. And it wasn't just any flight. This one broke speed records, clocking Mach 9.6, so 9 times the speed of sound. Okay. So when these pilots go, whoa, dude, did you see that? Well, that, if it's going 9 times the speed of sound, that would evoke something like that. So then you ask, what are the chances that the world's fastest flight happened at the same time sailors were crying UFOs and thinking aliens? I asked Matthew Camlett, NASA Armstrong's public affairs specialist, for details about the test. And then he gives these details about the B-52 dropping this little rocket engine thing over Edwards Air Force Base. And then the Nimitz thing was, they were off of San Diego, so it's not that far. It's 150 miles, 200 miles. If you're going 9 times the speed of sound, you can get there pretty quick. It traveled 250 nautical miles while boosting itself and 600 more miles during the engine test and descent. That path would have taken it near the Nimitz. And then you quote him, of all the gin joints in all the world, it just so happens to coincide in 2 days. To me, I think that's there's somewhat of a connection there. And then you point out that this was so many years ago, people could easily mix up their dates, and it was at the same time, same day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot of curious stuff like that about the videos. Those, existing before, for the ones that were in the New York Times were leaked again, as a lot of people probably remember. It was just last month, I believe, that the Pentagon finally officially released these videos, which means the ones that were there weren't before. And to me, the biggest thing, in addition to weird coincidences like the scramjet, is that what we have are 30 seconds or however long these are of totally decontextualized footage, with no beginning, no ending, and no associated data. And there's not really a way for people to draw conclusions, even including the people who are drawing extraordinary conclusions, and it just leads to more and more confusion. But when defense officials are talking about these right now, they'll call the objects in these unidentified aerial phenomena, but in their definition of that, that also includes just things that aren't immediately identifiable and also things that are unauthorized. So it's kind of it's slippery. And whenever they bring up their concern about UAP or UFOs, they're talking about the proliferation of drone systems. They're not saying, we're worried about aliens coming here. They're like, we're worried about all these drones flying around. So I don't know.
I just remembered something. You're in Denver.
I am.
And didn't Denver have that drone mass hysteria or whatever you want to call it, mass sightings a few months ago, just before the pandemic, I think.
Yeah, it was a little east of us, but yeah, there was. I'm part of a Facebook group that's like Colorado Drones Investigations group, where people just keep, it's a continuing topic of discussion.
Did anyone get to the bottom of what that was, if it was anything?
I mean, I am not totally up on the latest, but at one point, officials had drawn the conclusion that it was mass hysteria and that there were just a few drones, right? And that they were the same and people were just noticing
right.
what was up there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there we are again. It's like there are weird things in the sky. It's like the 1890s blimp sightings all over the place. UFO blimps, when dirigibles were first invented. So, yeah, the whole thing to me feels like kind of modern myth making based in some fact of what people really see. Like Roswell, that something happened there, and it was probably this Project Mogul, this top secret. Wait, is that right? Mogul, the high altitude balloon tests. They were listening for Soviet upper atmosphere nuclear tests or something like that. The acoustic signature of something like that. Yeah. So of course the government's going to lie about that. They're not going to say, "Oh, we're spying on the Russians."
Yeah. Actually, myth making, I think, is a good term. I read a book written by some anthropologists about Roswell and about how people do construct a myth and how this myth followed the exact path of other myths before it, and that since Roswell, actually, that unfalsifiability thing has been key to UFO belief. Like if you think the government is lying about something, then there's no way to disprove it. Like I can say to you, yes, it was Project Mogul, and then you can say, no, you're lying and the government's lying, and the government can say, look, we'll open the doors of Area 51 and you can go see that there's no aliens there, and then you can say, well, you're lying, you just moved them, and so there's no way. There's no way to prove it, to prove that negative.
Yeah, I thought of that very example when George W. Bush announced that we couldn't find any of the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and their initial response was, well, that now we know they had them because they moved them. And I thought, that's what the ufologists say. That's not that's not an argument. You can't make that argument.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's a thinking error that shows up all over the place.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I thought of something else with the WikiLeaks. Here, the absence of evidence is evidence of absence, in as much as one of the arguments ufologists always make was, well, it's top secret, classified. That's why we don't have, the documents you skeptics are demanding. I mean, Stan Friedman would famously hold up these documents with the big blacked out. There's like one sentence in a 3-page document. There's nothing on there. And he said, blacked out. See, they blacked it out. Well, but in WikiLeaks, here you have 10 million top secret documents or whatever. Not one mention of Roswell, Area 51, the secret UFO program, nothing.
Right. That is an interesting absence of evidence. And, I think what also makes people suspicious of that and suspicious of the government are things like something we didn't mention earlier from the 1960s, the Robertson Panel report, which was sponsored by the CIA, that kind of lays out the fears about what the public would do with UFO information. Like if people are afraid of UFOs, it could cause mass hysteria and panic in the streets, and UFO groups could manipulate the minds of the people and clog our intelligence channels. And so I feel like that kind of attitude does pervade the way that, Pentagon officials and intelligence types do talk about UFOs and things, where I think that's probably part of why we're not just getting straight information about this latest program, why they won't just say, look, this is what it did, this is what it was for, is because they still kind of afraid. And then that looks secretive. And then when you're secretive, it makes people mistrust you.
Yeah, right. So. Well, again, back to conspiracy theories, enough of them are true that it pays to be somewhat conspiratorial minded. I mean, we know corporations cheat, like Volkswagen cheating the emission standards and pharmaceutical companies hacking the FDA standards and so on. This goes on all the time. Insider trading on Wall Street. Politicians are nabbed for, indiscretions and manipulating systems and absconding with money. This happens, it's pretty much weekly. So the idea, and again, the government did lie about Roswell. And even in 96 and 97, when they came out with those two documents attempting to explain the double phenomena, both the alien bodies and the UFOs, that these were test dummies that they dropped from high altitude and they conflated their memory because these were years apart. Even that was kind of a bit of a reach. I felt like, okay, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, all of that does make me totally understand why people don't believe what various arms of the government tell them about lots of things and about UFOs. And I mean, I'm a journalist, it is also partly my job to try to find true conspiracies and seek them out. And so there's a part of me that has that mindset too in the way, but I mean, you don't want to go the full QAnon or something like that. You want to keep a check on it. But I mean, being suspicious of officials, skeptical of authority, I think does pay off, as long as you can also, I call it, and in journalism we call it red teaming yourself, like poke holes in your own argument, see flaws with your own thinking, think about alternative hypotheses. So, by the way, in the WikiLeaks, there's also no documents about 9/11 as an inside job. You would think that there'd be something in there, a memo from Bush to his, vice president, whoever, make sure you plant the bombs in the right place or something. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's like a difference in how evidence is evaluated by people, and with the deception on the part of agencies that makes it confusing. You also had talked about John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. I forget what he was mixed up. It was in one of those leaked documents, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Was it the Wiki? I'm not remembering. Yeah, I guess it was the WikiLeaks, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. His emails were leaked, and his campaign was talking to Tom DeLonge, this guy who's so into UFOs. About UFOs and about bringing the information to the youth. Tom DeLonge had a nice little speech about how together they could make young, cool people trust the government again, and bring this important phenomenon to them. And so a lot of people in the UFO community grabbed on to the fact that Tom DeLonge was talking to John Podesta and to the campaign managers as evidence that he was correct. And
but you looked at all those emails. I think you said that they didn't really respond to him like he was writing to them, right?
Yeah, he wrote them a lot more emails than they wrote back to him. And what they did write to each other about it seemed to be more like, how can we use this guy to get more votes because he's a famous guy? Or
right.
There was at least one that was like, do you actually want to respond? So it didn't seem like they were taking him quite as seriously as you hoped they were. Yeah.
What's he like? I've never met him.
Tom DeLonge?
Yeah.
I have not met him either. He never talked to me. No.
Oh. Yeah, I just wonder what the appeal is of him to a lot of the UFO community, other than, well, he's a famous rock star, so here's somebody that can elevate our cause, maybe something like that. How about Robert Bigelow?
He actually didn't want to talk to me either. He doesn't really like to give interviews, and especially doesn't like to give interviews about UFOs. So, but from what I understand from previous profiles and things like that, he's a serious guy. He's a businessman, even though he has a space technology company where he builds kind of modules that one day he hopes will become hotels in space. He's actually kind of anti-technology, and I'm not sure if this is apocryphal, but people say he doesn't use email, things like that. So he's just kind of a serious old west no nonsense guy who also happens to have an extreme interest in UFOs and the paranormal, which he's been funding studies in since the 1990s.
Right, the paranormal. So that brings us to Skinwalker Ranch. You did go to that, right?
I did, yes.
Where is
that? It's in Utah. It's in the Uinta Basin in Utah, not so far from like Dinosaur National Park area.
Right.
Yeah, it's this plot of land that some Mormons, actually, speaking of Mormons, bought in the 90s. And then there was a newspaper story published about all these paranormal experiences that they were having on the ranch. And Robert Bigelow, who was interested in that, offered to take the ranch off their hands to buy it from them. And so there he set up a paranormal research facility called the National Institute for Discovery Science, where he said he wanted to just kind of systematically investigate, the UFOs, the skinwalkers, the giant wolves, all cattle mutilations, get infrared sensors, video cameras, lots of other instruments, and collect hard data on this for the first time. And he owned it for a long time. He ran the institute for a number of years, and the cameras always just seemed to shut down at the wrong time, and they could never quite catch the sneaky paranormal stuff. So we don't really have any of the data that he was hoping to. Yeah.
The whole paranormal world is like that. It's always just kind of right on the margins, can't quite make it out. And their explanation for that is, well, it's a very rare phenomenon. It only happens right on the edges. You have to set up the experiment just right. Like these ESP experiments or the remote viewing experiments, or even some of the odder ones with like deviations from statistical randomness is just barely above 50-50. It's 51-49, and is that statistically significant? Well, if you run the numbers this way and you crunch the statistics that way, you can kind of get it to come out and then no one can replicate it. And this Sue Blackmore, the British psychologist, she was a parapsychologist for a while, and this is what she writes: is like, we've been doing this for a century, and the deeper you dig into the actual methodology of the experiment, there's always some little weird anomaly thing, and it just doesn't quite work, and no one can replicate it. So she ended up becoming a skeptic, but they kind of hang on to that. And that's kind of like with the UFOologists. There's always this, just a hint, maybe, could be, there's this weird anomaly, and it's almost like the brain, your subtitle is Why We See Saucers. It's almost like the brain abhors a vacuum of explanation. Maybe psychologically we're just not built to say, I don't know, and just leave it at that.
Yeah, I think we're not. I think we are primed to go down rabbit holes and to give anomalies a lot of importance and to want to pursue them. And I think Robert Bigelow did that with this, and did that with, he funded a number of other projects kind of along the same lines, just one-off throughout the years. I think millions of dollars. Just, it kind of comes back to that thing about belief and motivation for research. Like when you think something is true or might be true, that's highly motivating for you to just keep going down this path, even when evidence presents itself to the contrary or doesn't present itself at all.
Right. Yeah, we just published a very old lecture by Carl Sagan from 1974 at Colorado Springs at the Air Force Academy there. And it's a great talk. It's a sort of, what the cutting edge of astronomy was in 1974 in terms of, exploring other planets and the possibilities of ETI and all that. But in the Q&A, somebody asks him about UFOs, and he just says, wow, that just the evidence is so crummy. And so he goes, so it kind of comes down to this, that the stories are either reliable but not very interesting, or really interesting but not very reliable. So the example, the first one is like, it's the 4th of July and there's people out having picnics at dusk all over the place, and many of them report seeing this weird thing in the sky about the same time that there was a missile launch, or something that it's probably explicable that way. So it's reliable but not very interesting. Or interesting is the woman that says, so I'm standing there on my porch and this big craft comes down and lands in my front yard, and it's a shiny disc and it has seamless doors. And he says they have this fascination with seamless doors.
Yeah, it's like a Tesla.
It's like a Tesla, right? And the aliens come out and they do something with her, and then they go back, and then so you go to check on the story, and she's now lives at this mental institution down the road, and so it's like, okay, we can't even talk to her. Interesting, but not very reliable.
Yeah, and I think that's been the state of things for a long time, especially since most of it is based on eyewitness accounts, and something a lot of people who study UFOs have asked me, well, if you want so much evidence before you have any sort of belief in them, what kind of evidence do you suggest we get? And I think, I'm not saying we should dedicate the resources to this, but I mean, there are sensors all over Earth and above Earth all the time. Data exists that could tell us, theoretically, something about lots of these sightings or their prevalence, and some places are working on that. There's a company called Hypergiant that specializes in artificial intelligence. I don't know if you've heard of them. Mm-hmm. They actually have a number of government contracts, and they are going to correlate reports with satellite data and automated image analysis and the signatures of various known military and commercial aircraft and stuff, and kind of screen out what's left. And I think that's an interesting project.
Yeah, you would think with all of that you just described, plus everybody has a phone with a high definition video camera. If they were coming here, we should have plenty of footage. On the other hand, they could say, well, they're not here now. They were here in 1947, or I don't know if you ever looked into the ancient alien stories. They were here thousands of years ago, and of course, people back then didn't know what to describe. They had no notion of extraterrestrials, so they call them angels or demons or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't really look into ancient aliens theory, but that does kind of bring up that, and maybe they were only here in 1947, does bring up the idea of why would they stick around? Like, if they came to visit, and where do their ships go when they're not, crashing here or visiting? For the past 6 years, what are they up to? Do they go back home and come back really fast, or what are they doing? They're
in the backside of the moon.
Yeah, well, no, exactly.
We've actually seen that now. So, yeah, I was going to read another portion from your book I really liked toward the end. You're kind of reflecting on all this work you've been doing and your own background. One night, in the midst of this philosophical turmoil and probably procrastinating on my physics homework, I went outside and looked up at the sky. I really tried to imagine all those pen lights were actually roiling spheroids made of plasma, scattered across seemingly empty light years, actually filled with invisible matter and energy. I tried to feel like this. What I knew to be true was true. It wasn't easy, in the way that it's not easy to re-inhabit any long-lost state of consciousness, new love, adolescent angst, sharp grief, or ones that you've just grown so used to that they don't feel like anything anymore. Old love, constant angst, dulled grief. I could only hang on to the actual emotion for a few moments. But during the seconds when I succeeded, I started to feel differently about insignificance. If nothing we do matters to anyone or anything greater than us, if everything, lives, loves, losses, triumphs, terribleness, dies with our civilization, maybe that is the part that doesn't matter. All of this human stuff feels significant to us here and now. And maybe that feeling was truer than the truth that it's probably all for naught. Man, Sarah, that's some pretty heavy reflection there.
Yeah, it sounds kind of depressing when somebody else reads it.
It's beautiful writing. I mean, it's kind of like you were just sort of looking back at it all like, what did this mean? And whoa.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting when I stopped being religious. I had to try to kind of make a new meaning for my life when my viewpoint was essentially, as that demonstrates, kind of nihilistic about it all. And I kind of came to the conclusion that what feels important and significant day to day can be significant just because it's significant to us, and not because it's significant to the universe or because it has some kind of greater meaning than that. And so, I guess it's maybe kind of like the placebo effect of existential philosophy or something.
Is that how you felt when you gave up your religion?
Yeah. I mean, Mormonism is kind of a very all-encompassing religion, and it gives you, the reason how you got here, the reason you're here, what you're supposed to do, and what happens after. And when you leave it, you don't have any of that. So it's kind of like starting from scratch.
Right. Yeah. One of the discussions in atheists and humanist communities is, if people are losing their religion, do we need to replace it with something? So there is something of a movement to create like a secular religion, where you have, you can get training in marrying people and presiding over funerals and, just pretty much the full complement of what religions offer, except no afterlife part. But, we're here for you, and, we have free parking and babysitting.
Yeah.
And there's these Sunday sermons that you could go to, and a little bit like Universalist Unitarians. They're kind of deists, or I'm not sure what they are actually. But they sing hymns to Newton, and they light candles, and they give testimonials about how they lost their religion. To me, when I'd go to a few of these, it felt like being back in church again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I understand the appeal of that for a lot of people, and probably also especially people who have kids or families. But yeah, maybe I'm just not quite enough of a joiner, because when I think of that, I think maybe I would do something else with my Sunday, or think that I don't know, especially people who leave a lot of religions, and people who leave Mormonism in particular spend a long time in a phase of defining themselves kind of in opposition to religion, like you were saying, telling their stories of leaving. And then I think, I don't know, for me at least, I kind of moved out of that and stopped identifying myself as like X this thing, and just started being what I was now. And at that point, I feel like something to replace religion in the form of religion didn't really appeal to me anymore. You don't call yourself an ex-mo? What's the other word? There's ex-Mormon, and then there's another word for it. I forget what it is now. There's Jack Mormons. Is that? Oh, I don't know that one. Oh, that's for. Oh, that's I know. Former Mormon. Yeah, former Mormon. Yeah. Do you know Dorothy Parker's funny line about why she doesn't go to church on Sundays anymore? She says, "I'm too fucking busy," and vice versa. That's okay. A good one. That's a good one. Another way to spend your Sunday mornings. Okay. Yeah, but Sagan used to talk about this, that that the whole SETI program, ufology, whatever, even just astronomy in general, kind of touches a deep religious impulse we have, whatever that means. The sense that, we're not alone, or there's something else out there, or something bigger than us, grander than us, and that's what I think he tried to capture with Cosmos, and that, Andreen and Neil have tried to do with the reboot of Cosmos is, just sort of take us out of our mundane lives of work and politics and blah, blah, blah. Every day there's some trauma, and just kind of, pull back and go, what, none of this really matters in the big scheme of things. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I think it's, your passage kind of reflects that. Good to get, I think it's good to get that kind of perspective. And I think, at least for myself, not having religion, I do try to seek out, wonder and beauty and those kinds of things in other ways, and try to, make myself ask big questions, even if I'm not asking them of some God figure. So.
Right. I mean, it's like modern Buddhism with, you meditate or you do long walks on the beach or long hikes in the mountains. You're a long distance hiker, right? Or runner or something like that?
Yeah, probably somewhere in between. I do ultra marathons, but probably at a pace that might qualify as hiking. So yeah, I'm training for a 50-mile race right now in the mountains. So I get up to the mountains in Colorado most weekends.
Do they still do that? Wasn't it the Western States 100-mile run?
They do. I think they just canceled it for this year,
Oh, yeah.
because of the whole pandemic thing. But
Yeah.
it's still around. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I do a lot of long distance cycling, and sometimes when I'm out on a long ride by myself, you do kind of lose yourself, and it becomes kind of a reflective moment. I'm not sure that's the same as meditation. I've tried meditation. I just haven't been able to dial into it. I'm told it takes a while, but sometimes I feel like I'm kind of doing it when I'm just out on my own with my thoughts, and maybe that's something like that.
Yeah, I think that's how I feel when I run long distances. Is it's a way to quiet the mind and let weird big thoughts come, especially around mile 25 or something, when you don't have
Much
your
left.
mind isn't constantly worrying with all the modern stuff, because you're just so focused on how tired you are and how much you would like to stop, that you just don't really have any other thoughts, and
Right.
it kind of, I think, frees up a different part of your brain. Yeah.
Like the shift now in psychology, positive psychology, from studying happiness to studying meaningfulness. And turns out they're not the same thing. That, what people do to find meaning is not the same as what they do to find happiness. So happiness is more short term. Maybe you go out to drinks and dinner with your friends, big fun. But then after it's over, it's over. It's like, well, okay. But you go for a long run and you're suffering, but afterwards you feel like a better person, or you had some big reflective thoughts, and so on. And those are different things. So meaningfulness is more sort of focused on the long term forward, and also constructing some kind of narrative about your past. This is why I'm here. This is the path I'm on. The reason I'm on this path is because I want to, whatever it is, change the world, or make politics better, or whatever it is. Having some cause bigger than you. That it isn't fun doing it. It's not like I'm so happy doing this. That's a different phenomenon.
Yeah, and I am glad that they are doing that. I used to get mad at all of the here's how to be happier studies, because I didn't think that was the be all end all, but I didn't really have the words to articulate what a different way to look at that was, until I started reading the articles about meaning and meaning making and things like that. So I think it's a good shift.
Yeah, Clay Routledge is a cognitive psychologist in Montana, a friend of mine who studies this. He's really on now about how culture's changing and how people are kind of scrambling to find deeper purpose and meaning. In part, there's us baby boomers that are getting older now, but millennials, that on the other end, and or Gen Xers, that were born after 1996, they're coming of age in a very different world, where now the fastest growing religion is nuns, the no religious affiliate. Okay, so where are these people going to turn to? And the little dating app box you check, spiritual but not religious. What does that mean? When you say, "Well, I'm a spiritual person," I don't know what that means.
Yeah, good question. I don't either. But I do feel like this particular moment in history, and the collision of the pandemic and social justice and racial reckoning with our racist past and present and things like that, all of that kind of coming together, I think, is going to force a lot of people to ask themselves a lot of questions about their lives and our society, and maybe for a while probably things won't be happier, but maybe afterwards they will be more meaningful.
It's a weird year. Really weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot. Just a lot going on. Yeah.
I mean, maybe like me, you're a rider and a long distance runner, so most of that you do by yourself anyway. So the social isolation hasn't really changed my life that much. On the other hand, the engagement with other people at restaurants or whatever, even if they're just sitting there, it's like you kind of miss that. And then the protest stuff, wow, I mean, this has really been a game changer in terms of the sort of the history of U.S. protests. I don't think we've seen anything like this since maybe 1968. And, I wrote this book, The Moral Arc, about moral progress. And it's like, wow, maybe I've overlooked something and I'm trying to check my white privilege and so on. And it's there for sure. I know I have that. I mean, my wife was pointing out, because I drive a Tesla. She goes, "You're driving a Tesla around Santa Barbara. You're never going to get hassled by the police, right? You were driving while black, or my left blinker's out. They're not going to pull me over, right?" So I really have no idea what that's like. I really don't. And so I guess the question is, I don't know the answer to this, but to what extent is systemic racism still pretty deep, or is it the bad apples? And maybe there's more bad apples than we thought, but most of them are good, and I just don't really know. Clearly, there's still a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially a lot of the things we've seen on video and in social media in the past few days have changed a lot of people's minds about how many bad apples there are, and made a lot of people think of this as a systemic problem rather than as a one-off problem. And I don't know, it's I think it's good that in a moment like this we do have social media and everyone has a phone, so we can get at least like a random sample and see what's going on out there.
I don't know if you read Neil deGrasse Tyson's Facebook posting on this the other day. He's a longtime friend, and I was wondering if he was going to say something, because he's never wanted to define himself as a black astrophysicist or the black scientist. He's just an astrophysicist, period, full stop. And I always respected that, but he finally kind of wrote a thoughtful piece the other day on his Facebook page about all this, just the kind of the little insults, not, I was thrown to the ground with a knee on my neck, not like that, but, just driving while black, walking while black, or JBB, just being black. And he had lots of examples. And I thought, I've never experienced anything like that. And, we have to kind of tune into some of that more now.
Yeah, I mean, if you were a black man driving a Tesla around Santa Barbara, you might get stopped because people thought you stole it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah, this could be a major reckoning. Well, we're way off the path from UFOs, but kind of
we are.
reflecting what the bigger questions that you're after there. I think it's important to remember too in that final passage about the kind of context of, if the universe is going to die in another 14 billion or whatever it is, 30 billion years or something, it's all going to be gone. What difference does any of this make? This is kind of a theist argument. Without an outside God to validate our existence and meaning, what's the point? Because in 30 billion years, the universe won't even exist. Well, the point is that we don't live 30 billion years from now. We live now. And it matters what I do and you do and what people do to each other now, not in the afterlife. Whether there's a hereafter or not, we live in the here and now.
Yeah, and I think that was a big shift for me, because in Mormonism and lots of other religions, the whole focus on what you do now is what it means for you later, and so it kind of prevents you from thinking about the present significance and meaning of things like that. And so that was a big shift for me.
Yeah. So how would you answer somebody now that says, well, why should you bother to be a good person? Because you don't believe that there's going to be a payoff in the end.
Well, I mean, there's something to be said for being able to live with yourself while you go about the rest of your life. But no, actually, be a good person was like the one rule I came out of religion with. I was like, how am I going to form my moral framework? And the one thing that mattered to me was not, harming other people, and figuring out if I was harming other people, because that here and now is important, and I wanted to be good for me, and I wanted to be good for other people. So I would like not to hurt them, and I would also like in return for them not to hurt me. And that's not how life goes, of course. And I hurt people all the time, I am sure. But I think it's a good working framework for us making that present better.
Of course, it's something like the golden rule, so religions could claim some originality to that.
They could. They trademarked it.
They trademarked it, yes. But I think, I try to think of it from a social science perspective. They experimented with a lot of different things. That one turns out to be true. That is that sort of principle of interchangeable perspectives. I'm not special just because I'm me and you're not. Therefore, if I want you to take me seriously, I have to appeal to you. and how you want to be treated and so on. And so a lot of philosophical, ethical systems have kind of developed along those lines, like Rawls' Just Society of the, what he calls the veil of ignorance, that if you design a law, you can't know which group you're in to decide, how to design it. So therefore it should be fair to blacks and whites and males and females and, rich and poor and so on, because there's a veil of ignorance of which group you're going to be in, therefore how you will be affected. That's that kind of argument that, a reciprocity kind of argument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We'll see how it plays out.
And what made you give up Mormonism? What was that path like?
I was early in college, and it was the time when the first gay people in California were getting married, and Mormonism says you're supposed to feel one way about that, which is very bad. And I felt pretty good about it. And I just came to this realization, like I could either believe what someone in Utah told me I should think and feel, or I could believe what I myself actually thought and felt. And once there's one thing in Mormonism where you say, I don't believe what the prophet of the church says about that, then the whole rest of it kind of just falls apart, because what the prophet says is true. If it's not true, they're not a prophet. If they're not a prophet, neither was Joseph Smith. So Mormonism's not real. So it was just like the span of 5 minutes, the whole thing kind of fell apart.
Wow,
yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What year was that?
2003.
Oh, wow. Has the church changed its position on gay marriage now, particularly after the Supreme Court decision?
No, it actually took a stronger stance against gay marriage for a couple years. And said, that if a kid had parents who were married, who were gay, then that kid couldn't be baptized in the church, and essentially put having a gay marriage on par with murdering someone sin-wise, and put it in policy. And then I can't remember exactly when they rescinded that, but it was just recently, within the past year or two.
I was wondering if they were going to change it, because they have made major changes. I mean, polygamy was outlawed in 1896 when Utah wanted to join the United States, and the government said you can't have that polygamy thing, and they got a new revelation. Well, I was talking to God, and He said no on the polygamy thing. Oh, okay. Apparently, God can change His mind.
And the same thing with Black people and the priesthood couldn't for a long time, have the power of God or be the full. Be a full member. And then after the civil rights movement, they waited a little while, but then the church was like, okay, fine, we heard from God, and we don't think that anymore. You would think that maybe God would have something to say sometime soon about gay marriage,
I think that's coming. Well, I've been predicting since 2015 that religions would come around. First of all, they'd quit talking about it, and then at some point in a few decades, they'll look back and go, you know what? That was our idea, that, that we should treat all people the same, and those Episcopalians who supported gay marriage, those are our guys. They're Christians. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be a fun rewriting of history.
Well, I mean, in a way they did that with slavery, because now, theists and Christians take credit for it. And because William Wilberforce was this, major abolitionist, and, but who were his, as I point out, who were his primary enemies? Were his fellow Christians that said, no, slavery is totally okay. It's right here in the Old Testament. This is what God wants. He put the separate races on different continents for a reason. And, as I also point out, again, on the gay marriage thing, remember when interracial marriage was a thing? And most people go, no. It's like, right. That used to be illegal in the United States until 1967. It was illegal.
Not even that long ago.
Not that long ago. I mean, it's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So I it seems to me that the gay marriage thing has kind of dropped off the radar, maybe because it's been pushed off by all these other incidences that have been happening. But I do think people are just going to quit talking about it as they get used to it.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, once we see that society doesn't just dissolve as soon as we let two people get married, then
Right.
maybe there's less reason to keep talking about it.
I mean, some of the lamest arguments from before is like, well, if you allow gays to get married, then people will marry animals. Like, what? It's the slippery slope, and before you know it, the Western civilization will be destroyed. Okay. Right.
Any day now. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, Sarah, we've covered all the major topics, I think. I really loved your book, and so I'm dying to know what's next on your project list.
That's a good question. I actually just finished up some book proposal research, actually about Mormonism and the ways that the internet is changing it, and these different little subgroups and splinter groups that are forming both in the more conservative and the more progressive direction. I'm just kind of interested in how the religion is evolving and not evolving, and so yeah, we'll see if any publishers actually want that.
That's a great idea. It's particularly this moment in time with the rise of the nuns and all that, and religions are, the Catholic Church is going through upheaval, and I think all religions are scrambling to try to figure out the modern world. That would be so interesting. Did you ever read John Krakauer's book Under the Banner of Heaven?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, that was such a great read. Again, an outsider kind of diving in to see what this is all about, and when he comes up with, you'd be former insider, which would be particularly interesting.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you're not the only one who thinks so. We'll find out.
Yeah. Well, there'd be like a sociology of religion and how they change, and then how they rationalize their changes and all that. In a way, that, in other words, studying like civil rights and women's rights and gay rights and so on, I sort of track it that religions are just behind the crest of the wave. They sort of get pulled along as the whole wave goes. And once it crashes, then they're like, okay, we're fine with this, but they're always lag behind by a few years. Like if you track the pollsters for, when you agreed that same-sex marriage was, when it hit 50% or more, I think it was 2011. That's when both Hillary and Obama said they now support gay marriage. Before that, in 2008, they both had opposed it, although you never know what people actually think when they're campaigning because they have to say whatever they have to say. But somewhere along there, publicly, it shifted from around 2011, it was more than 50% support gay marriage. And then 2015 is the Supreme Court decision. That's incredibly fast.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'll have to. The crest of a wave is a good analogy that I'll have to, steal with credit from you. Yeah.
And then the other thing about the sort of changing Mormon, there's still those polygamous groups living up there in sort of the border of Utah and Arizona. I think where am I thinking? There's Kayenta. There's a few of those little towns.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of creepy to go into them, where everyone there is one of the, including the sheriff and the judge and so on. It's incredible that they can still get away with it. I guess legally they do so because although the government says polygamy is illegal, they don't marry. They only marry one person, and the others are sister wives or whatever. Let me give you an idea. You can give me some feedback on this. I'm just thinking out loud because I'm not sure what the answer is, but I used to think, because I was kind of a libertarian in my philosophy, whatever consenting adults want to do, I don't care. Polygamy, fine. Prostitution, fine. I don't care. None of my business. That consenting adults, okay. But then when you look into it, like in the case of polygamy in the Mormon Church, these are young girls that are raised like this. So the idea that when they're 20, they're making some kind of rational decision is not at all what you and I would make living in a completely different environment. Would think is, I'm calculating my life path, and this is the journey I've chosen. Mind your own business. I want to be married, whatever. To the extent that people have autonomy, if that's the only world from age 2 or whatever, and at age 15 you're told, well, you're going to marry that old guy over there. Okay, that's got to be hard to break out of that.
Yeah, and I've heard both of those arguments from both sides. I've actually done some reporting in those towns down there, and I've heard from people on the inside. This is a life I chose. It's a life I believe in, and it's a life I want. And then I've heard from people who were part of it and left, who said there's not a way that you can choose and want it when you don't know anything else, and also you believe it's what God wants for you. And then from outsiders, I've also heard kind of the libertarian argument of what, let people do what they want. And then also, we should save people from this bad life. So I don't think there's an easy answer. And I mean, my family was never fundamentalist. We were very mainstream. So I just have one mom. It is, if you were part of a powerful religion, it is hard to think of alternatives to it or to imagine your life differently, especially when you're raised in it.
Sort of touches on human agency and free will. To what extent are you really free given the constraints of your background? This would apply to all of us, but it seems like some people have fewer degrees of freedom than others if they were raised in like a cult or some extreme environment. And my other example, prostitution, again, sex workers, whatever, it's none of my business. They should do what they want. But on the other hand, there's a lot of cases where these young girls, maybe they're teenagers or in their early 20s, and they have, they're drug addicted and their pimps beat them. And, are they really agents, making rational, volitional choices the same way you and I do in some other aspect of our life? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard questions. And I mean, I think at the core of it is what is exploitative and what is not, and who decides what's exploitative and what is not.
Right. Yeah, like that Warren Jeffs character.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. Yeah. He was a piece of work, and it gets worse the more you learn about him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he was for sure exploitative, and those girls were not old enough for anything.
No volition there. I think remember when the Supreme Court decided that capital punishment does not apply to people that are like under 23 or something like that. It was based on brain development. Maybe it's 18, but that the prefrontal cortex is not fully online and developed until your early 20s. So somebody that has an impulsive act and murder somebody, they're 17 or something. They're not really the same level of autonomy and responsibility as an adult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good decision. I know when I was 21 or 22, I thought that I was fully developed, and I would definitely argue with that now. Yeah.
And immortal.
And immortal.
That's right.
I don't think any of those things now. Yeah.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for the great conversation. Super interesting. Love the book. Again, they're already here. And thanks for your work.
Yes. Thank you for having me.